Jennifer Sey is one of the most controversial women in America, but you may not have heard of her. She is the founder and CEO of XXXY Athletics, a clothing brand and apparel brand that is on the front lines of the fight against transgender athletes in the sports, particularly sports of young women. I'm sure you're familiar with that issue. Jennifer, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Sure. So, not many people want to attach their name to being on the fight in this issue. It's very controversial. People have really strong feelings about it. How in the world did you get involved in this issue?
It's a great question. I was an elite athlete as a child. I was an elite gymnast, 7-time national team member, 1986 national champion, and then a longtime fashion executive at Levi's, one of the most beloved brands in the world. So I felt like my background as both an elite athlete and a brand builder made me sort of uniquely qualified to actually start a brand that is standing up for the protection of women's sports. When I looked at all the other brands out there, the athletic brands that pretend to stand up for women, they're not weighing in on this issue. They're terrified of it. And in fact, some of the biggest brands, I'll cite Nike in particular, has made lots of money over the years profiting off of pretending to stand up for women, but they notoriously treat women with astonishing disregard. So I just felt like I was in a unique position. I've had years of experience of being dragged across the internet. It doesn't bother me anymore. Might as well go for it.
So, let me ask you, when this issue has been talked about, it's become very political because it was a major theme in the last presidential election. It was always talked about. The Republicans ran a lot of ads on the transgender issue, and it was widely seen as a success for them. Now, in the postmortem of the Democrats' loss, their internal narrative and what they've tried to spread is basically that this is a non-issue that Republicans made into an issue. The Republicans basically latched onto, and nobody really cares about it, but it was fear-mongering. And I've even seen recently, CNN, other places online, that this is basically conservative propaganda. And what is the propaganda? They say that young women are actually losing trophies in large, significant numbers or scholarships to transgender athletes. And two, that they're actually unsafe in locker rooms or sharing locker rooms with, basically men. So let me ask you, is this really happening, or is this just some kind of political talking point that people are, using for their own gain?
Well, it is happening. The UN issued a report a few months ago that stated over 900 instances of males taking trophies in team births from women in the last 2 years. I don't think 900 is a small number. That doesn't just impact 900 women. That impacts every woman that male competed against and won, every single one. It actually, I think, reaches far beyond that, because what it says to any young girl who is aspiring to compete at the highest levels in sport is that she's not guaranteed a fair or safe playing field, and that her feelings and desire and right for safety and fairness matters less than this male's desire to have his identity validated by competing in women's sports. No one is banning anyone from sports. Compete in the category to which you were born. The headlines often read, transgender athletes are banned from sport. No one's arguing that if you are born male, compete in a men's category. Sports are not about validating identities. Sports are also not about inclusion. That's another argument made. Oh, well, we need to be inclusive. Competitive sports are not inclusive. They are exclusive by their very nature. Someone loses. If you're not in the weight category that is designated, you don't get to compete in that category. If you're not in the age category, there's all sorts of categories in sports that exclude certain people. Except women's, apparently, doesn't exclude anyone. Everybody gets to compete in women's that wants to. So it's not a made-up issue. I agree with you. It's been politicized. It shouldn't be. It's an issue of fact and biology. It's just an issue of basic fact. And for me, the reason this matters so much is not just protection of women and girls, but defending basic truth. I'm not going to sit here and spew a lie that if you say you're a woman, you are. That's not true. And the world just becomes completely destabilized for me if I'm told I must further a lie. So I won't do it.
You work with these young women. You know them. The political issues, sure, this is personal for these girls. And
sure,
what do you hear from them? I think the average 16-year-old girl does not want to become a national spokesperson for some contentious issue. I think they just want to, do well in their sport or live their life and not be. So but many of them have been forced to step into that role.
Yeah.
When you talk to them, what do you hear from them? How are they affected personally, emotionally when they're losing these spots?
Yeah, I mean, most of them, and I'm so struck by their strength and their character. Most of the young women we work with are between 18 and 22. I mean, even Riley Gaines is only, I think, 23 years old. So incredible strength of character. I wouldn't have been able to do it, I don't think, at that age. It took me longer to kind of come into my voice. But I think there's just sort of lit on fire by the things that I articulated, which is fairness and truth. You know, they've worked their whole lives to get that D1 scholarship, and now they're put in an unfair and unsafe situation. And I think for most of them at 21, they're nearing the end of their competitive careers. And so they're fighting for future generations. They all speak about that. And, you know, there's one young golfer we work with who has many years ahead of her still, who says, you know, this isn't even about my golf career. That's not what this is about. It's about future generations, and it's about basic truth and fairness. So they just have incredible courage, I think, and discipline and character. And that's what we want to develop in young people when they play sports. And we're happy to help give their voice a little more oomph and, you know, platform them for the brand. There aren't very many women that are standing up and saying this, that are, you know, here's another statistic I'll just cite. There is not a single Olympic level or sort of high level professional athlete currently competing, that has stood up and said, this cannot happen. You know, we have Martina Navratilova, who is one of the best tennis players of all time. I believe she's in her 70s at this point, if not 70s, late 60s. She's not currently competing. We have Riley, who is young, Riley Gaines, but she's not currently competing. We need currently competing athletes at the highest level to stand up and say this is ridiculous. And they all know it is. You know, there's this famous clip that goes around in Serena Williams on some late night show from 10 years ago where she was like, oh, I can't remember what male tennis players she's talking about. He would kill me. And he's, you know, ranked in the 200s and she's number one. She says men hit harder, they're faster, it's a different sport. She said, I love women's tennis. Why won't she say that now? She won't say it now. That was 10 years ago when we had, you know, this delusion had gripped the world. But we need people. We need the Serena Williams and the Simone Biles and the very high level. I believe when athletes themselves stand up and say no more, that it will stop. And we're not there yet. But I am so proud of the brave women that we work with, who I think are leading this movement.
Let's talk political for a moment. Let's talk about Trump. President Trump signed an executive order immediately upon taking office to declare there are only two sexes. Interesting, he used the word sexes, not genders. I think there's something tactical in that. But it's going to reflect the, you know, policy of the United States. That's a huge shift, a 180 shift from the Biden administration. Since then, you know, there's been more on the transgender stuff. Of course, many people don't know this. I've covered DEI in the government extensively, and DEI is not just racial. Every transgender policy is kind of shoehorned into all the DEI stuff too. So it's not just about, you know, helping young Black kids get scholarships or something. It's totally all in on the LGBT agenda as well. And so, you know, from your perspective, you're keeping up with this issue. A lot of people care, but they don't know what the next court battle. They don't know policy wise. They don't even know what to look for. So what does the legal landscape look like on this issue?
Great question. So on his first day in office, he signed the first EO, which you just cited, which is that there are only two sexes. And I think using the word sex, not gender, is purposeful. He sometimes says gender, but the EOS has sex. There are only two sexes. Sex is binary. Gender, I think, should go away. It's what you say you are. I think it's a ludicrous terminology that I think it's time to do away with. So the EO is very clear. About a week later, I believe it was a week later, maybe it was a few weeks, he signed another executive order to protect women's sports and to say that women's sports are for women only. I was present for that one. That was very exciting. I was in the room. Here's what people don't understand. I mean, I'm so grateful that he did this. As a lifelong former Democrat, I was really grateful to be in the room. And I can't believe we need an executive order to say there are two sexes, but here's where we are. But executive orders have their limits. First of all, it's not legislation. So the next president can sign a different EO if we have a Democrat president reversing it. So we need national, federal legislation, and I think we need state by state legislation. Some states have already legislated the exact opposite. These states, some of them are saying, we're not going to abide by the executive order. So you already, this is all going to come to fruition in the courts, I believe. You have states like California and Minnesota saying, we're not doing it. If you say you're a woman, you are, and you get to compete in women's sports. So there's going to be a clash. The other limit of the executive order is it only impacts sports within federally funded institutions. So K through 12 schools, universities. 2 times as many athletes compete outside of federally funded institutions. I never competed in school. I competed for a private gymnastics club in the Olympic movement. Twice as many athletes compete there. That's not federally funded, not impacted. So we have a fight on our hands, is all I'm saying. I think what Trump has done is the right thing. He's put this in the cultural consciousness. And now I think we, the people, have to fight for legislation to get this done and final and permanent. And I think when the culture changes, this changes. If the people, the 80% of us who apparently agree, but many are silent on this, when they stand up and say, I demand that women's sports be protected, the U.S. Olympic Committee will change their rule. The individual sport governing bodies will change their rule. The last thing I'll say on this is the NCAA, which governs college athletics, created a new policy after Trump's EO that is riddled with loopholes and will not protect women's sports. The primary loophole, as I see it, is the proof that is asked for to prove that you are female is a birth certificate, which can be changed in 44 states.
Interesting. So you're kind of laying out how the progress that Trump's made can be basically undone pretty easily if there's a continued coordinated effort. And so it's totally inaccurate to say, we have the executive order, this issue's done.
It is inaccurate, which isn't to diminish what he's done, because I think it's exactly the correct thing. He's used his the power of the office in I believe, a very important way. But I think we cannot underestimate how the limits of an executive order and all the ways that we, the people, need to stand up to make permanent the idea that women's sports are for women only through legislation and just through changing the cultural conversation. Legislation is downstream from culture. There was no legislation that allowed Will Thomas to compete in women's. It's not going to, what ends this is the people standing up and the sort of will of the people being made clear. And that's another reason I started the brand, is I think brands can influence culture. And right now there's just so many in the majority that are silent because they're afraid of being called mean names.
Right. And so kind of the last question is, last word here. Tell us about your brand. What is the goal? What are you seeing?
Yeah, our goal, we're the only brand. Our mission is to stand up for the protection of women's sports and female athletes. No other brand is doing it. That said, we make world-class products. I'm in this for the long haul. This is not a gimmick. I want to provide an alternative to people so they can buy a brand that aligns with their values. They don't have to sacrifice fit, quality, style, or performance to get great product. We've only been around 11 months, not quite 11 months. So definitely making an impact. The business just took off like a rocket because I think people were so relieved to find there was an option that aligned with their values. And I think they're loving the product as well, which is really encouraging to me because they may come for the mission, but if you don't deliver them great product, they're not going to come back. And, so we try really hard to deliver world-class product. And I think we're succeeding there.
And is just women or men too?
No, we had men's too. We sell more women's, but we definitely make men. We need men in this fight. Men care about truth too. Men care about fairness for their daughters and sisters and wives. And so, we make men's, and the men's is doing really well. But the business is about 75-25, 75 women's. Definitely leans harder into women's.
Great. Well, Jennifer Sey, thank you. Thanks for your time. Appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you.